Nathaniel Cole had a theory about love, and it had cost him 12 years, 4 almost marriages, and every ounce of trust he had left in the world. He believed that no one showed you who they really were until they were pushed. So he pushed, quietly, deliberately, without mercy. He tested every woman who ever said she loved him, because his mother had taught him one brutal lesson before she left when he was 9 years old. People leave when it gets hard, so you'd better find out how hard they can take it before you let them in. He was 34 now, a successful architect in Savannah, Georgia, with a restored townhouse on Jones Street, a closet full of tailored suits, and a heart wrapped in so many layers of caution that even he sometimes forgot what it felt like to be simply foolishly happy. His friends teased him about his tests. His sister Margaret called them cruel. His therapist, whom he saw exactly 3 times before deciding he didn't need one, called them a defense mechanism dressed up as due diligence. Nathaniel called them common sense. The tests were never the same twice, but they always followed the same principle. Create a crisis, real or manufactured, and watch what the woman did when the version of him she loved suddenly became inconvenient. He'd cancel plans last minute and see if she got angry or if she stayed kind. He'd pretend to lose his job and watch her face when she thought the money might disappear. He'd disappear for a weekend without a word and see if she panicked. If she raged, if she left, every single one of them had failed, in one way or another. Either they clung too hard, revealing a desperation that frightened him, or they walked away too easily, proving his mother right all over again. He told himself he was protecting his future. He never let himself consider that he was simply making sure he never had one. Grace Ellison walked into his life on a Tuesday in October, during the worst rainstorm Savannah had seen in a decade. She was soaked through, hauling a portfolio case bigger than her torso, standing outside his office building trying to get the revolving door to cooperate while balancing an umbrella that had already given up the fight. Nathaniel, coming down from the 4th floor with his own umbrella dry and unopened, watched her struggle for exactly 4 seconds before something in him, something he hadn't scheduled or tested or approved, made him walk over and hold the door. "Thank you," she said, breathless, water dripping off the ends of her dark hair. "This city has decided to drown me today." "Savannah does that sometimes," he said. "Keeps you humble." She laughed, and it wasn't a practiced laugh. Not the kind he'd learned to recognize from women trying to impress him. It was loud and a little embarrassed, like she hadn't meant to laugh that hard at a stranger's mediocre joke. He found out later she was an illustrator, freelance, in Savannah for 3 months working on a children's book commission, staying in a rented carriage house 2 blocks from his own. Small world, she said. Small enough, he thought, to be dangerous. He didn't mean to fall for her. He never meant to. But over the next 2 months, Grace became the kind of presence he hadn't allowed himself in years. She left charcoal, smudges on his kitchen counter. She fell asleep on his couch with paint still under her fingernails. She argued with him about whether pineapple belonged on pizza with a ferocity that made him laugh until his ribs hurt. She didn't perform for him. She didn't manage him the way the others had, carefully tailoring their reactions to what she thought he wanted to see. Grace simply was who she was, unguarded, unimpressed by his money or his precision or his carefully curated life, and it terrified him more than anything ever had. So he tested her, because that was the only language he knew for love. The first test was small. He told her his firm had lost its biggest client and that he might have to sell the townhouse. He watched her face carefully when he said it, the way he always did, cataloging every micro-expression for signs of retreat. Grace's response was to open her laptop and start looking up smaller apartments near the historic district, asking if he'd rather stay in Savannah or if this was a sign he should finally take that job offer in Charleston he kept talking about. She wasn't calculating what she'd lose. She was already planning how to help him figure out what came next. It unsettled him so much that he told her the truth that same night. There was no lost client. He'd made it up, expecting anger. She just looked at him for a long moment and said, "Why would you do that to yourself, Nathaniel? You didn't need to test whether I'd stay. I was already staying." Then she went back to her sketchbook like it hadn't shaken her at all, though later he'd learn it had shaken her plenty. She simply refused to let him see it, because some part of her already sensed what he was doing, and she wasn't going to give him the satisfaction of a reaction. He should have stopped there. He didn't. The second test was crueler, though he told himself it wasn't. The way people always do right before they cross a line. They've been circling for years. He staged a disappearance. He told Grace he was flying to New York for a client meeting, and instead he simply went dark. No calls, no texts, nothing. For 4 days, holed up in a hotel 3 miles from his own house, watching his phone, waiting to see how many times she'd call, how desperate her voicemails would get, whether she'd finally show the cracks every other woman had shown under pressure. Grace called once, the first night, to ask if he'd landed safely. When he didn't answer, she didn't call again. She didn't text in a panic. She didn't spiral. On the fourth day, when he finally walked back into his own house expecting to find her worried sick, he found her instead calmly packing her portfolio case, her charcoal, the small collection of things she'd left scattered through his home over 2 months. "You're leaving," he said, and something in his chest, something he hadn't given permission to feel anything, cracked wide open. "I already left, Nathaniel," she said quietly. "4 days ago, you just didn't notice, because you were too busy waiting to see if I'd fall apart." He tried to explain. He told her about his mother, about the leaving, about the 12 years and the 4 almost marriages, about the theory he'd built his whole guarded life around, that people show you who they are when things get hard, and he needed to know before he let himself love someone completely. He thought foolishly that if she understood the wound, she'd forgive the way he kept reopening it on other people. Grace set down the sweater she'd been folding and looked at him with something that wasn't quite anger. It was worse than anger. It was disappointment, clean and total. "I know exactly why you do it," she said. "I've known since the fake job story. You don't test people to see if they'll stay, Nathaniel. You test them to give yourself permission to leave first, so it feels like their failure and not your fear. Your mother taught you that people leave, but you're the one who keeps making sure they do." She zipped the portfolio case shut. "I'm not failing your test. I'm refusing to take it. There's a difference. And if you can't see it, then you're not ready for anyone to love you. Not me, not the next woman, not anyone. Love isn't an exam you get to grade in secret. It's something you build in the open, together, and you decided a long time ago you'd rather be alone and in control than loved and vulnerable. I hope you figure out the difference before it's too late. I really do." She left that night, not dramatically, no slammed doors, no shouted words, just quietly, the way she'd done everything, carrying her portfolio case down Jones Street in the last gray light of evening. And Nathaniel stood in his doorway and let her go, because some broken part of him still believed this was proof he'd been right all along. It took him 3 months to understand how wrong he was. He didn't chase her right away. His pride wouldn't let him, and beneath the pride was something worse. Shame, thick and suffocating. Because for the first time in his adult life he understood, with total clarity, that he hadn't lost Grace to her own fear. He'd lost her to his. Every woman before her had either clung too hard or walked too easily, and he'd told himself that proved something about them. But Grace hadn't clung, and she hadn't walked easily either. She'd stayed steady through every test he threw at her, calm and unshaken, right up until the moment she understood there would never be an end to the testing. That loving him meant an endless series of exams she could never actually pass, because passing was never really the point. The point had been his fear, dressed up as her failure over and over again, with every woman he'd ever loved. He went to therapy for real this time, not 3 sessions but 30, sitting in a small office 2 blocks from his townhouse and finally saying out loud, to someone whose job it was to actually listen, that he was 9 years old the last time he trusted anyone completely, and that he'd spent every year since trying to control the ending of every relationship before it could control him. He learned the name for what he'd been doing, a defense so old it had calcified into personality. A way of engineering abandonment so it would always feel like someone else's choice. He learned that Grace hadn't left because she was weak or scared or unwilling to fight for him. She'd left because she was the only one strong enough to refuse to keep playing a game, designed so he could never lose. He wrote to her once in December, a letter instead of a text, because some things deserved the weight of ink and paper. He didn't ask her to come back. He told her, honestly, everything the 3 months of therapy had taught him about himself. And he apologized, not for the specific tests, but for the 12 years of treating love like a liability he needed to audit before he could risk it. He told her he understood now why she'd walked away, and that he wasn't writing to undo that, only to make sure she knew she'd been right, and that leaving had been the healthiest thing anyone had ever done for him, even though it had broken something in him that needed breaking. She didn't write back for 6 weeks. When she finally did, it wasn't a letter. She showed up at the door of his townhouse on a cold evening in late January, without warning, her portfolio case in hand, the same as the day she'd left. Nathaniel opened the door and felt his whole chest go still. "I'm not here because of the letter," she said before he could speak. "I'm here because I finished the children's book, and I'm staying in Savannah for another project. And I realized I didn't want to keep avoiding the 2 blocks between your house and mine like you were a pothole in the road. I wanted to see if the man who wrote that letter was real, or if it was just another version of a test. This one aimed at yourself instead of me. It's real," he said. "I'm not asking you to trust that right away. I know I don't get to ask for anything. I just wanted you to know." She studied him for a long moment, the rain starting up again behind her, softer this time, more forgiving than the storm that had first brought her into his life. "I'm not coming back to fix you, Nathaniel," she said finally. "I'm not going to be your proof that you've changed. If we do this again, it has to be because you've already changed, not because you're hoping I'll be the reward for changing." "I know," he said. "I'm not asking you to be my reward. I'm just hoping you'll let me be someone worth knowing, without an exam attached to it." They didn't fall back into each other that night. There was no dramatic embrace in the doorway, no easy resolution wrapped up in a single conversation. Because real repair is slower and less cinematic than that, and both of them knew it. But she stepped inside out of the rain, and they talked for 3 hours, honestly, about the tests and the fear and the mother, who left in the years he'd spent making sure everyone else left, first so it would never have to be his fault. And when she finally left that night, she left with the door open for something to grow slowly. On new terms, if it was going to grow at all. It took nearly a year. There were no more tests. Nathaniel made sure of that, not through willpower alone, but through the long, unglamorous work of therapy and honesty and choosing, again and again, to stay present instead of engineering an exit. Grace watched him do it, not with suspicion, but with the quiet attention of someone who'd learned that real change reveals itself in consistency, not in speeches. And slowly, without either of them declaring some grand turning point, Savannah became the place where two people who had both been taught to expect leaving finally learned what it felt like to simply stay. They married the following autumn, in a small ceremony under the live oaks on Forsyth Park, with no tests, no exams, no hidden crises waiting to be staged. Nathaniel stood at the altar and thought about his mother, about the 9-year-old boy who decided love needed proof, and understood finally, standing across from the one woman who had refused to play his game, that the only test that had ever mattered was whether he could learn to stop giving them. He had, and she had stayed, not because she'd passed anything, but because there had finally been nothing left to pass.